Have you ever seen a normally calm person completely lose their mind? What happened? I had a master sergeant in the army who was half asleep most of the time. I don't think I ever heard him talk more than once. One day, all the guys got called into the large classroom and he was there looking upset. He launched into a rant about how easy it is to pee into the toilet instead of on the ground. The dude was passionate about where people pissed. He even drew a stick figure diagram all angrily showing how you use one hand to stabilize and aim the pee into the toilet. I had to keep from laughing because he seemed like he was about to blow his lid. Story 2. My 5th grade teacher was a very calm and collected individual, except for this one time when a kid said her mother was a whore. She lost it. She was screaming about disrespect and even called her mom and put her on speaker and asked if she was a whore in front of the whole class. Story 3. I worked as a line cook with a chef who I became really good friends with. He was a really chill dude, easygoing, and actually super fun to cook with. He taught me most of what I know about cooking, and I owe him a lot for my success. I never really saw him get mad, until one day we were getting slammed during a busy night, and one of the servers said something that really ticked him off. I'm not sure what was said, but next thing I knew, he had sent the deep fryer basket flying across the kitchen, nearly missing the dish kid and shattering a light bulb. He stormed off, and 5 minutes later, after a smoke break, came back and casually continued cooking as if nothing had happened. He apologized about it the next day, and we never talked about it again. The restaurant industry is a stressful place. I'm sure the face of the server would be hilarious to have seen in person. If it was me who he threw the fryer basket at, I'd make to stay on his good side from then on. Story 4. A mechanic I worked with named Henry was getting verbally abused by a customer claiming we ripped him off. The guy was going off saying all sorts of racist stuff, and then stepped up like he was going to swing on him. Henry beat him to the punch, literally. He calmly walked to the back office and called the cops on himself. Story 5. I used to do seasonal work sorting tax returns. It was about 500 people in a warehouse-size room sorting through the returns, stacking them in boxes and other stuff. This one huge guy on my team was a gentle giant and really nice. Suddenly one day he smashed the table he was working at, then flipped a big box full of paperwork that flew over my head and 20 feet away. He threw the table out of his way and then stormed out. Turned out he was getting his paycheck garnished for something. Story 6. I was chilling at a friend's house as a kid. His dad was a really chill and nice guy. That day my friend's mom, who was also super nice, was across the street talking to the neighbor about something that I can no longer recall. The neighbor was one of those guys who never respected common etiquette. He would have music blaring all the time, and would park his shitty boat in front of other people's houses. He'd also have old cars parked on his lawn and just junk everywhere. The neighbor started screaming at the mom, and we all went out to see what was happening. As soon as we got outside, the guy called my friend's mom a cunt. My friend's dad heard that and went full Hulk mode. He ran screaming across the street and just decked the guy and crouched over him shouting warnings and threats. It took a while for his wife to calm him down. I don't think any of them had ever seen him react to something in that way, maybe even the dad himself. A lot of people will take all kinds of abuse if it's directed at themselves, but the moment it's someone they love, it's different. Story 7. We had what we now refer to as the Jerry Springer Christmas when I was 7. One aunt hated her sister-in-law and started screaming at her. Then shoving started, and the husbands got involved, and it just continued to devolve from there. My mom went straight into mediator mode and tried to calm everyone down, but it wasn't working. She decided to come check on us kids, and found my cousin and me holding each other and sobbing because we were scared. The next thing I hear is her scary mom voice screaming over everyone. "Listen here, you motherfuckers. My kid is in there crying on Christmas because her family can't keep their shit together for the one day a year. We all see each other. You're gonna march your asses into that room single file and apologize to each kid individually. Then you're going to shut the hell up until I get them out of here. We're going to go look at lights, and this family better be the picture of goddamn Christmas joy by the time we get back. My mom never really cussed in front of me, and only ever used GD when things were really bad. That side of the family didn't celebrate Christmas for a few years after that. Story 8. When I was in my late teens, I was financially irresponsible and borrowed money from my grandparents to move out of my mom's house. We made a plan on how I would pay it back in installments, and I only missed 2 payments. With each one, I called my granddad and asked if it was okay. He was always cool about it. One day, I got a call from him, and he was livid and screaming at me on the phone, and I could hear my grandmother crying in the background. He was the angriest I've ever heard anyone in my life, and I was terrified. He wanted to know why I hadn't made the payment that month, but I was sure I had. It turns out, I had accidentally set the automated payment to be drawn from the wrong account, and it hadn't done it. It was an honest mistake on my part, and I explained that to him. I transferred the money immediately, and he instantly calmed down. I later found out he had become an alcoholic after he quit smoking, and he would talk to my grandmother like that regularly when no one was around. Alcoholism can unfortunately change even the nicest people into someone you can't tolerate. I've also seen the opposite, where someone terrible to deal with when they're sober is one of the nicest people you'll ever meet when they're a few beers deep. Story 9. I had a friend who was in his 60s and a functioning alcoholic. He was the most calm and composed guy I have ever known. He never used to raise his voice or swear. Everything was done with meticulous precision. He once explained to me that if you use vulgar language and shout all the time, then you will have nowhere to go when you really do get angry. I had worked with him for about 3 years and never heard him raise his voice or swear before. The week before, he had been shafted on his pay, and the manager promised to get it sorted by Friday. Friday rolled around, and it had not been sorted. So when my friend walked up to the manager in the open office and declared loudly, "Where the fuck is my money? You promised this would be resolved." The whole office went silent, and the look of dread on the manager's face was haunting. The money was in his account by the end of the day. That was him losing his shit. Story 10. I used to see this woman in my building every day who was quite a bit older than me. She was really friendly, and we always checked on each other's lives and had lunch together a few times over the years. One day while riding the elevator, she told me that she was saying goodbye. I said I was sorry to see her go and asked why. She said she was retiring that day. I asked if her office was throwing a party or if she was being celebrated. She turned to me, and her face contorted into an image of rage. She clenched her teeth and said she didn't tell anyone in her office, including her bosses. She only told the HR person last week. This was her last day, and she was never returning to see or talk to anyone in her office again. Story 11. It takes a lot to make my mom yell. On the rare occasion she did yell, it still felt like she had self-control. She yelled only when it had purpose, like when she needed to be that loud for us to hear, or one of the kids needed to learn to never run into traffic again. However, one morning when we were teenagers, my brother was being extremely difficult. My very sweet and soft-spoken mother yelled, "God damn it, Sean!" and threw a butter knife down so hard it stuck deep in our oak hardwood floor. We were all very well behaved for the rest of the day. I did eventually ask my mom why she did that. Her explanation was that she felt she was too angry to hold a knife, even a butter knife, and was trying to get it out of her hand before she did something stupid. Story 12. One of my teachers in high school was the calmest dude I've ever known. He never yelled, never told kids off, and would just laugh and smile and wait for us all to calm down and then continue with his teaching. One day we must have been particularly rowdy, and we weren't calming down like we usually did. He couldn't get a word in. I could see him getting increasingly frustrated, and eventually he just bellowed, "Shut up!" And the entire class was shocked into silence. He never had to do it again. Story 13. This happened when I was 21, with a friend I've known since we were kids. We'll call him Kevin. Kevin was always happy and always smiling. He's the type of guy you would call at 3 a.m. with a flat tire, and he would just ask where you're at. He was never one to start anything, and always managed to diffuse any situation with a smile, an offer of friendship, and a beer. While me, on the other hand, seemed to be in a bar fight every weekend, Kevin would always be there to break it up. He would regularly get hit, but he never swung back. He isn't a big dude, about 5'9" and a bit overweight, but he worked in labor-intensive jobs at his family business since he was young, so he was deceptively strong. Normally, when breaking up fights, he would just pick people up and set them down behind him. Something about being picked up by the biceps and just moved without violence or malice seemed to always take the fight out of people. It was like his superpower. Anyway, we had a party at our house. This was an every weekend thing at the time, and we were all outside sitting around a bonfire. A friend of a friend called Steve was being a dick, getting in people's faces saying he was going to kick their ass, and we generally ignored him. He was drunk, and it was kinda his normal behavior, and nobody took him seriously. He got in Kevin's face screaming at him because he was sitting next to his ex-girlfriend. Kevin let it slide. At this point, Steve had his forehead against Kevin's just screaming. I guess something just snapped in him. Without any warning or words, Kevin picked Steve up by the throat and slammed him into the ground and started to just beat the snot out of him, never letting go of his death grip on Steve's throat. All of us were frozen for a second. This was the first time we had ever seen him be violent. We quickly snapped out of it and ran to get them apart, but we found out that wasn't going to be easy. It took 2 guys pulling Steve's legs, another 2 pulling Kevin's, and a final guy pulling Kevin's hand from Steve's throat. This entire event probably only lasted 20 seconds, but Kevin never stopped swinging. Once they were apart, Kevin snapped out of it and began apologizing to everyone, including Steve. Kevin even went and got a wet rag and ice pack for Steve. Kevin kept apologizing to everyone the rest of the night for ruining the party. We told him he didn't. Besides, we got in fights all the time, just don't worry about it. After that night, I've only seen Kevin snap once more. A guy sucker punched our friend in a bar while we were just talking on the patio. The guy ended up with a handprint on his throat and 2 black eyes. It again took several people to pull him off. Our always smiling Kevin has a genuinely frightening side when he stops smiling. Story 14. My dad is the most mild-mannered person I have ever met. I once saw him trip in our garage and land in a bucket of nails and screws and had one lodged into his kneecap. He looked over at me and said, "Don't tell your mom, she'll overreact," while he grabbed a pair of pliers and yanked out the screw. But when something happened to my special needs brother, he would get this sparkle in his eye that could scare a Navy SEAL. When I was 8 years old, my parents took my brother and I to eat at a restaurant, which was kind of a big deal because my brother was recently diagnosed with a degenerative physical health issue, which was racking up huge medical debts. All while my dad lost his job after getting the bends on a work dive. We went to our favorite Mexican restaurant and parked in the handicapped spot nearest the front door. I still remember having an unusually light-hearted time in which I could see my parents' stress level subside and listen to them tell funny stories about the past. We simply enjoyed a memorable dinner with lots of laughter. Looking back, I realized this was a big expense that my parents probably couldn't afford and made the sacrifice so we could have a normal night as a family. When we left the restaurant, we found a car parked next to us, not in a parking spot but in the yellow stripes immediately next to our van. Normally, this might not be an issue, but my brother is in a wheelchair, and we had a folding ramp. Not the hydraulic lifts that you see today, but a heavy metal powder-coated ramp. This was a Friday night, so traffic was crazy busy, and my parents didn't feel comfortable just backing up into the street to load my brother. So my dad went into the restaurant to see if the manager could find the owner of the car and ask him to move. When my dad emerged from the restaurant, I saw a look that I have never seen before. It was one of focus, determination, and rage. He looked at my mom and told her to get in the car. She just hopped in and said, okay, in a way that indicated she knew something might go down. He turned to me and said, "Watch this shit." He unfolded the ramp and slammed it on the roof of the car next to us, then turned to explain that the manager told him, "I'm not responsible for what happens in the parking lot. Why don't you just figure something out?" So he did. There were only around 5 groups eating in the restaurant. He could have easily asked someone to move. We waited for a minute, and the manager came out yelling, "What are you doing? You can't do that." This was when my dad lost it. At this point, he picked up my brother's wheelchair with him in it, which weighed about 200 pounds, and sat him on the hood of the car while yelling at the manager. He then jumped on the hood of the car, and then picked my brother up to put him on the roof of the car, still yelling at the manager. He jumped up to the roof and calmly rolled my brother across the ramp and into our van, told me to get in, and calmly told the manager, "I figured something out." Since that day, I have never seen anything remotely close to the same level of anger from him. We laugh about the story from time to time, and my dad is always quick to say that he overreacted, but I think he reacted just fine. I think OP's dad responded appropriately for the situation. There's a reason the handicapped spots have the lines next to them for this exact reason. Maybe the dad could have went in and found the person who parked there himself. But then what kind of story would that be?